Call to order a meeting for the Normal Town Council for July 2nd, 2018. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus?
Here.
Mr. Fritzen?
Here.
Mr. McBride?
Here.
Mrs. Cummings?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. Preston? Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
We'll begin with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll begin with public comment. We've had 7 people request to speak tonight. Just go over the rules real quickly. We ask that you identify yourself by giving your name, and also that you hold your comments to 3 minutes or less. Because we do have a fair number of speakers tonight, I'm going to be a little bit strict on that. And I will ask the speakers to come up in order in which they contacted us to request to speak at council. So the first public speaker would be Kathy Hogg. And you can just come up and sit in the center chair here. The microphone is on there.
Good evening. My name is Katie Haig, and I am Vice Chair of the Student Sustainability Committee at Illinois State University. I currently live in an apartment that offers no option to recycle. On behalf of the committee and many students who reside in off-campus housing, I urge the council to pass the ordinance to require the collection of recyclable materials in multifamily dwellings. As contributing members of this community, students and other normal residents living in multifamily homes deserve the same easily accessible opportunities to participate in recycling as those living in single-family homes. As quoted from the Town of Normal's own website, recycling reduces the amount of waste sent to landfills, thus saving money, conserves natural resources, prevents pollution, saves energy, and helps sustain the environment for future generations. We believe these lasting benefits greatly outweigh the initial costs of implementation that may fall upon the owners of these multifamily units. Finally, the Town of Normal has taken admirable and progressive steps towards sustainability in all aspects of life with the community-wide sustainability plan approved in 2011. Passing this ordinance would be a noteworthy accomplishment towards the city's goals. Again, for these reasons, I urge the council to pass this ordinance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And my apologies for missing both of your names, Katie. Thank you.
It's okay. It happens often.
Next speaker is Steve Snyder.
Well, it's been a while since I've been up here to address the council, but I felt this issue was important enough to bring it up and just express my concerns. I've tried to discuss this issue with each one of you, either through phone calls or emails, so hopefully you understand my position. First, I do recycle. My wife and I work diligently to recycle materials. In fact, my wife is here this evening. She doesn't like it when I introduce her, but she's here to offer me a little support. As we all know, recycling is necessary, but the ordinance is flawed. This one-size-fits-all ordinance does not work with all multifamily properties. Each property needs to address this issue and figure out what would work best for them. The only property I can speak to is the largest multifamily property in Normal, and that's Ironwood Gardens, which myself and 2 other partners own. It has 454 units. Ironwood Gardens has 14 dumpster areas, and to require a recycle bin next to each one would be a mistake for the following reasons. The property will lose at least 1 parking space and possibly 2 because of the screening required for each recycled bin. That's possibly 28 parking spots that we would lose. I feel that's a consequence that probably wasn't even thought about in the ordinance. The recycle bin needs to be separate from the general trash to avoid contamination by tenants. And the tenants, what they put into those bins, we really have no control over. So to have a recycle bin right next to a trash bin, I think would be a huge mistake, just from a contamination aspect, which actually doubles the cost to us as providing that service if the recycled materials get contaminated. And then any tenant that really wants to recycle will find the recycle area on the complex. I think if you had one general area, possibly two on a property the size of Ironwood, that would suffice to meet the needs of the whole community. But to require a recycle bin right next to each dumpster, I think is just going to be a huge mistake. The ordinance as proposed is burdensome and expensive to landlords and needs to be defeated. I hope you will send this ordinance back to staff to develop a better plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Anna Witters. We don't require that, do we? Recycle bins for every dumpster. Talk afterwards. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Anna Whiters. I am a Student Life Senator within ISU Student Government Association. I also live in the Sammy Apartments. I'm speaking today because I hope the council will vote for the proposed recycling ordinance today. Students throw away so many recyclable items. On top of that, the recycling locations that used to be spread out around the area are now downsized and harder to reach. On top of that, realty groups have argued that they will have to increase rent for this service, yet they don't seem to want to move around their budget for promotional items that only lead to more waste. It is disappointing that after all the hard work that students have put in with working with realty groups, they still believe our voices are important. After all the surveys and petitions that students filled out saying overwhelmingly that they want recycling, realty companies still have the audacity to say that students will just contaminate recycling. This hurts our students, and our students are willing to recycle and want recycling. As a Student Life Senator, people come to me all the time asking for recycling, so this is why I'm here, to be the voice for the students in which I serve at Illinois State. Students are not the only ones affected by the outcome of this vote. Families and individuals living in apartments around the town are also in need of this service. In other major towns, every house, duplex, and apartment is provided recycling through the town. In the long run, it saves money for both the county and for the residents. As a representative of my constituents and as a voice within the school, I believe that this ordinance should be passed and individuals living in an apartment get the basic service that they deserve. Thank you, and with that, I yield my time.
Thank you. Our next public comment comes from Alyssa York.
Hello, my name's Alyssa York, and I'm a student in Illinois State University, but more importantly, I'm a concerned resident of the town of Normal. I believe it is of the utmost importance that this recycling ordinance gets passed. Many students and community members wish to recycle but cannot because of the inaccessibility of recycling. There are few recycling centers throughout town, but this is not enough. We need recycling options in our apartments and homes. I recycle despite the inconvenience because it's important to me. I save boxes and bottles in my living room, taking up my whole living room, for when I can go to Walmart or the Alumni Center to drop them off. And I think the amount of recyclable items I see in the dumpsters outside of my apartment that could be recycled and saved from the landfill, saving space and money, makes me want to cry. The environmental, economic, and social benefits of having recycling far outweighs the cost. And the McLean County Board and the Bloomington City Council have already enacted something like this, so I don't think we should be on the wrong side of this issue. So as you can see from some of these people in attendance tonight, there is a demand for recycling at our apartments, businesses, and homes. So please.
Reading about this online, the council says this is about equitable access, when in fact the ordinance, as written, will deny tenants the rights that single-family homeowners have. Homeowners have the choice if they wish to incur the cost and trouble to recycle, Without the ordinance, tenants do have the same choice. If they feel strongly about recycling, they can let landlords know they're willing to pay extra, give up parking spots, go to other spots, or I walk by 3 recycling things as I walk into my job at ISU every day. Just take your stuff to class. Landlords would be falling over themselves if they had 1,000 students saying they'd be willing to pay 20 or 50 bucks extra a month for good recycling. Under this ordinance, all tenants are required to pay for extra recycling and to have less space, whether that's their choice or not. This will also hit hardest the tenants who are most underserved and have the least economic resources, who are trying to find the lowest rent possible and live in the least space possible. They will have even less space and pay even more for it. There have been complaints among the community about a lack of affordable housing in Normal, and this ordinance will simply make that problem even worse. Yes, it would be nice if all apartments had on-site recycling, a lot of green space, solar water heaters, and similar amenities, and without having to pay extra for them. But we live in reality, not utopia. Do Normalites deserve affordable housing and freedom of choice, or do they deserve to have even less usable take-home pay so that they can pay for Big Brother Council's pet causes? Please prove me wrong when I say I already know your answer.
Our next speaker is Andrea Gilleran.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to have me talk. My name's Andrea, and I'm a student at Illinois State University. I currently live with First Sight at 106 South Main Street, not that you need to know. So I grew up my whole life recycling and having that valued in my family. I remember we had a little blue, well, we still do, we have a blue recycling bin in the garage, and my mom's like, oh, glass bottles, they go in recycling, plastic goes recycling, and that's just been a program in my head since I've been a preschooler. And then I went off to college, and I learned that once you live off campus, you don't have recycling, and I just couldn't even believe that was a thing. That was just crazy. And so I'm not the only one that thinks it's crazy. I actually have this binder that has 3,000 student signatures that also say they wish that they had recycling off campus, because it's not fair. I currently have a recycling bin that's filled up because we go through more recycling than trash in my house. And we have to drive 5 to 10 minutes in order to recycle it, and that's completely out of the way. And that's driving. Most people that are in college don't even have a car. So it's completely unfair, and a lot of the things that college kids go through are recyclable items. We drink beer, we have beer cans. What are we, you just want us to throw that out? That's so much trash, and it's it shouldn't even be like that, so. I don't know. And I teach little kids, and we teach things oh, we're supposed to value the environment, and oh, we're supposed to recycle. And for them to grow up and then realize this is not even a thing that's accessible to me, it's just heartbreaking, and it shouldn't be how things are functioning. So if anyone wants this binder, I would love to give it to you guys, because it's a lot of people. So yeah, I'll leave it here.
There you go.
Thank you.
And our final speaker tonight is Colleen Horn.
I wonder if I could find my name through this, but it's been a few years, so maybe not. Good evening, Council. My name is Colleen Horn, and I'm the current president of College Democrats here at Illinois State. And I'm here to show support on behalf of the recycling ordinance that will be discussed later tonight. As president of College Democrats, I have seen my peers collect signatures, obviously right here, attend protests, and advocate for sustainability. Despite these efforts, we've had some barriers trying to ensure that we have something as simple as recycling in our apartment complexes. Young America and other realty sites have made 3 main arguments. So one of them is that college students are incapable of sorting out recyclables and cannot do it properly. How absolutely condescending is that? I mean, you have students here that are going to be lawyers and doctors. I myself want to be a teacher. If we can get through classes like calculus and education classes and survive finals, I think we can learn how to recycle materials. I know that I have been recycling since I was like 8 years old, so if an 8-year-old can do it, I'm pretty sure that my fellow peers can learn as well. The second argument that they make is that government shouldn't mandate something like recycling. However, any civics class or basic history class will teach you that without government intervention, among businesses especially, people often can get taken advantage of. This is the case especially with sites like Young America, who have essentially created like a monopoly here within town. There has to be some regulation on them, or else students are going to keep lacking access to simple necessities like recycling. The third threat that they bring up is the fact that they may have to raise rent, which we touched on earlier, which you would think is dang near impossible because they pretty much gouge us with any possible way that they can. To that I say, change your marketing strategies. They have Connect Transit buses with their logo wrapped on it. I have 7 Young America t-shirts in my closet right now. I just counted before I came here. And those aren't counting the ones that I've rejected from people on campus as well, or like, thrown some out or whatever. I have the utmost confidence in Young America and other realty sites that they can find ways to reallocate their money, to spend less on t-shirts and other marketing tools, and they can find a way to afford recycling services for their tenants. Tonight, I implore the council to listen to and represent a group of students that has been, our voice that has been drowned out by companies like Young America or First Sight. If you want to accurately represent your constituents, and about 20,000 of them are students, then you will provide us with something as simple and necessary as recycling. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment tonight. We move on to the omnibus agenda items that are considered routine and will be handled by one vote. Unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion, I would like to be excused from voting on any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayor. Mr. Fritzen.
I'd ask to be excused from the Bloomington offset bill.
Motion for approval?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Items under consideration on the omnibus agenda tonight are approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of June 18th, 2018, and approval of town of normal expenditures for payment as of June 27th, 2018. A resolution authorizing the execution of an agreement for technical planning services with the McLean County Regional Planning Commission. A resolution to accept bids and award a contract to Rowe Construction Company, a division of United Contractors Midwest, in the amount of $1,853,275.84 for the 2017-2018 General Street Resurfacing Project, and to authorize a budget adjustment of $21,746.84. And an ordinance modifying Section 17.3-4 of the Town of Normal Municipal Code, Smoking Regulatory Act for town-owned facilities, prohibiting smoking within a distance of 25 feet of entries, outdoor intakes, and operable windows. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The omnibus agenda is approved. We have one item of general orders tonight, and that is an ordinance adding Division 2 to Section 21 of the Municipal Code to require the collection of recyclable materials from multifamily dwellings.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion, Ms. Cummings. Let's get a staff comment here first.
Great. I'll just introduce how we got to this point a little bit and then turn it over to council. Back in, well, the proposed ordinance before you tonight is a result of a couple of things, basically. During the budget preparation process, you will recall that we initially planned to eliminate the Dropbox recycling program, but ultimately dropped from 8 sites down to 4. So we have 4 Dropbox sites located now in the community. And then in February, we adopted the Materials Recovery and Resource Management Plan, which we call the Solid Waste Plan, and also discussed the multifamily recycling issue. And both the Solid Waste Plan was discussed at public settings in both October and February. In both those times, we had public conversation about multifamily recycling. In February and March, staff took a step back and looked at the concerns, the issues of multifamily recycling to try to step back a little bit from a specific ordinance and find ways to address the issue. And we defined the issue as a couple of things. The first being, at some point, we need to divert materials from the landfill. That's in accordance with the solid waste plan. And we have a population of residents in Normal that don't have convenient access to recycling. They don't have the opportunity to recycle. And so we found those as the two significant problems that we were trying to solve. The ordinance presented to you tonight, staff believed, is a combination of conversations that have taken place over months of discussion. And we are suggesting this ordinance as a reasonable solution to try to provide services to a population that currently doesn't have access to the service. And we are recommending implementation in August of 2019. And that date was selected in response to the typical leasing timeframes of the student off-campus housing property managers. And so that's a little bit of the summary on how we got to this point. But we have Michael Brown in the audience who can provide the Ecology Action Center perspective if council has any questions. And then we certainly have staff that has been meeting with an ad hoc committee to find a solution to these problems. And we're all prepared to answer any questions council may have.
Thank you. Ms. Cummings.
Thank you. And thank you for that information, Ms. Reese. Might as well have the staff and Mr. Brown start to come forward, and I'll say a few comments and then I'll ask my questions as you're doing that. I understand both sides of the story. There is a responsibility to be concerned with some of your bottom line and revenue and from your income stream and what you consider your investment. I get it. It is also my responsibility to ensure not only that we talk about this issue and that we see the future for Normal from 10 to 20 years from now. Research has shown that not only our community, and recently discussed at the National League of Cities, that there are other communities who are facing landfill capacities. The impacts can be devastating, and many cities have already taken action. Some of them include places like DuPage County, Montgomery County, Maryland, Los Angeles, which actually did their plan back in 2006, Nashville, which proposed theirs and put forth in 2013, Louisville, Pasadena, Tempe, Salt Lake City, and the list goes on. Not to mention one not too far from us with a very similar demographic, which is the city of Urbana in 1999. They went through and did multifamily recycling to adjust and make sure that they were cutting their waste. Montgomery County specifically said that they are intentionally doing this to reduce waste by 70% by 2020. Now, I can actually speak a little bit about this myself. I recycled when I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and I moved here and I stopped recycling for a while because didn't have a bin, and I got a bin. And let me tell you, literally, I put more in the recycling than I do my trash. I think I put my trash on the street once a month instead of every week because I don't collect as much trash or much waste. Most of what I utilize, and especially because a lot of companies have now intentionally made more recyclable materials, I have a lot of items that I can recycle. With all that being said, as we know, we're faced with something per the Ecology Action Center making recommendations on how to circumvent future costs and future issues with the landfill. What will happen in the future if we do not heed the recommendations? Not only that, what are the costs that the residents all residents will foresee if we do not take action due to an overfill of our landfill.
I'll take this first by Wayne might have, yes, additions to make as well. So the town of Normal and the city of Bloomington both have a agreement right now with Republic Waste, also known as Allied Services, for disposal of landfill materials to be landfilled. That agreement, I believe, originated in 2014 for a 2-year period that is renewed on an annual basis, optionally, up to 5 years. And so that agreement with a set price schedule will go through, I believe, 2021. So there is no immediate threat of cost increases for materials to be landfilled. However, as we're looking at the McLean County landfill reaching capacity likely within just the next couple months, it is anticipated there will eventually be cost increases. Republic Services does indicate, due to economies of scale, that they don't anticipate cost increases. But we know that this is all subject to negotiation. And so a real-world example to look at for consideration, again, looking at the city of Urbana, who hasn't had a landfill for a couple decades. See, Champaign County has not had a landfill. And so the tipping fee for city of Urbana is approximately twice what the town of Normal pays. Town of Normal pays $50 some dollars per ton right now for disposal of materials at the McLean County landfill. City of Urbana pays about $100 per ton. And so that's just a comparative example. That does not mean that is exactly what will happen here. This is all subject to a variety of variables and factors, and we cannot predict exactly what the price is going to be. That is what the McLean County 20-year materials recovery resource management plan is designed to try and set some controls over some of these variables that we don't currently have control over.
I don't have any additional comment. Thank you.
Just wanted to make
Thanks,
sure.
Michael.
So, just want to make sure that I'm understanding and I'm hearing correctly, and that I have all my notes correctly. There is the potential, nothing's guaranteed, not even life, but there is the potential that we could see a doubling in costs, much like Urbana, possibly, based off of contract and the negotiations and all of those things, but
It is possible. It is possible. Public Services, if they were here right now, would say that they don't anticipate that in their near future, but we don't know what the future holds longer term. And so the plan is designed to try and assert some cost controls.
The only thing I would add, and I think Michael alluded to this, is that in the future, with the current vendor for landfill services, most of that material would be transported. We have a transfer facility here in town, and that's where we take the material, and from there, we don't know where they take it. They could take it to any number of their facilities, but it's likely in the future that they will have transportation costs added to that. They may now. We just don't know where they take that material. But again, it's just that extra step to transport that material to a landfill.
and so I know this would be a mitigation measure. Is there any additional mitigation measures that would have as much or equal significance in mitigating this issue?
I believe, it could be looked at as a mitigation measure to enter into a long-term contract, right now with Republic Services to try and lock in prices, but that's subject to negotiation as well.
The other thing, we're not talking about other materials like bulky waste, things like that. We've made great strides in that area, taking that to Henson Disposal for them to recycle that material. So that really helped. I know our countywide recycling rate, big time, I think, Michael, is so we really, that's been a huge step towards our recycling goals.
Thank you.
Further comments, questions, discussion? Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things I want to bring up. To the point of the cost, I think it is something we really can't predict. I did receive earlier today a letter from one of our area recyclers to a small business here locally that informed them of a price increase as of July. So, you know, who knows what's going to happen? And there may be other factors than just this ordinance that might be driving that up. So I think it's fair to say that we just probably don't know. But that aside, you know, I want to say that I too am for recycling. I do think that this discussion tonight is fitting with the history of our town to be environmentally conscious. I mean, I think we have a long history of thinking about these things, being mindful and taking the bold steps, you know, from proper green space to landscaping to complete streets. I mean, we're thinking ahead to the next decades and the next generation. And so in many ways, having this conversation is very much all about normal, and I'm glad for that. I'm glad we passed the solid waste plan last February. I voted for that. And I'm glad that there was a committee formed to look at this particular issue of the key stakeholders. So all of those things were and are going in the right direction. I do have a problem, though, with this particular ordinance, insofar as I don't think we had enough of the process. I think the process was off to a good start to bring people together, to collaborate. However, in the number of meetings, 2, maybe as many as 4 that might have happened, particularly with some of the larger apartment property owners, for whatever reason, what I'm hearing from that group is that they did not provide the input that they wished they had. I don't know why. I wasn't at the committee meetings, so I don't know if the dynamics were such they didn't feel like it was going to be welcomed input. I don't know. I don't want to speculate on that. But at this point in time, the information that I'm getting from a collection of property owners, some of which are part of the Illinois state-based, campus-based property owners, some of which are not, that they are saying that they didn't get a chance to share everything they wanted to. And so for that reason, I go back to the plan itself and see where in the plan, the solid waste management plan, we are in a period right now until 2022 where we can explore, I think it's written, geographic-based, non-exclusive franchise agreements for multifamily recycling, check its feasibility, and to do that, at least initially in lieu of an ordinance. There's language that talks about pilots, and essentially the spirit of that paragraph of the action plan suggests more of a phased-in approach. And as I said in some conversations that I had, Mr. Brown, with you, is I like your plan so much, I want us to follow it more closely. And I feel like through what maybe is not enough of the process, we have steered a little further away from the plan, perhaps a little hastily. And so for that reason, I'm going to look at my legal counsel here. I would like to propose a motion, if I may, to postpone this particular vote tonight on this particular ordinance. And I have some more specifics about that, if I may, if I can go on to that.
I'll second.
Ms. Lorenz, I'd ask you to pull that and to hold that until everyone's had a chance to speak,
Okay.
and then reintroduce it
Okay.
at that point.
So in further about that, it's, so you know the direction that I'm going, I think the staff began to research the ordinance shortly after we passed the plan in February. The committee took a couple of meetings in the timeframe of March to May. And frankly, I was surprised to learn 3 weeks ago that this process had accelerated to the point of a draft ordinance. And so I do think that we do need to pause, and I would encourage my colleagues here on the council to consider, after we get through some further discussion, I would like to introduce that motion to postpone.
Thank you. Mr. Fritzen.
Like Ms. Lorenz, I've been here at this table a long time, as you know, and supportive of recycling in our community. For years, there was when can we have curbside? When can we have curbside? We started the drop box recycling. We expanded the drop box recycling, and we took our time until until we sensed the desire from a majority of our homeowners, or a good number of our homeowners. We never took a poll, so I don't know if the majority or not, but and that equipment and efficiencies were available in the marketplace for collecting curbside recycling were available to us before we went to curbside. So it wasn't something we rushed into. And like Ms. Lorenz, I feel like we're rushing to an ordinance before we've maybe investigated some of the other options that might be available to us. I know in some of my conversations with some of the parties, that own some of the complexes in town, particularly the student complexes, I think there was a sense of we know this is probably something that's coming. We're not against it, and if our market is calling for it, we want to respond to the market. But we'd sure like to, maybe partner with the town in discussions, and partner with the town in maybe doing a pilot of some kind, just to see what kind of particular issues there might be out there, so that when an ordinance is drafted, that it will be one that meets the needs of both the community and our goals. I was surprised as well that we got to an ordinance quite so quickly. Granted, it does have an implementation date, over a year out, but it is an ordinance. It's not a suggestion for a pilot. And in the solid waste plan, there was to be there's a statement there to determine whether a voluntary program is feasible or not. So I guess we determined it's not feasible. I don't know, because then at that point we were to consider possibly an ordinance. So we're right to an ordinance, within months of having passed the solid waste plan. Now I know there are public meetings, there are opportunities for input. I've been part of that for a long time, and I know how that works. Until you get right up to the point, a lot of times you don't get the input that you would like to have, or people don't show up and express their opinions until there's actually a vote. And I think part of that is just the busyness of life and those types of things that people that aren't really married to an issue don't offer their input sometimes until later in the consideration. I think there were some salient points made via email and tonight and whatever, as it relates to the scope of multifamily complexes within the community. I think being a university community, you immediately go to the large student complexes when you're thinking about something like this, but there are many other multifamily complexes in town, small ones, 4-unit, 2-unit, as well as the big ones. And so kind of having that one-size-fits-all, I'm not sure is the best way to go. And that's where I think stepping back for a period of time and conducting a pilot program will allow us maybe to write a better ordinance. I fully expect that we will have an ordinance requiring multifamily dwellings and trailer parks and the like, I fully expect we'll have an ordinance requiring the provision of recycling opportunities, but I would like to have a tighter ordinance, and one that, one of the concerns I have is if this one is passed, how much staff time is going to be spent with individual properties coming in and saying, hey, this doesn't work, I don't have the space for this, will this be okay, will this be okay, will that be okay, so I think we can work through some of that if we were to field test some of these things. I do think, like I said, that historically Normal has been not on the leading edge necessarily, but we've been a community that has embraced the idea of recycling and diversion of materials from the landfills, but we've also been a community that's shown patience with that process, and I think that's what really needs to be implemented here tonight is let's step back a little bit, take some patience. The solid waste plan does have that first 5-year period, 2017 to 2022. 2017 is included, but it was right at the end of 2017 that the things first started rolling out. So it's really, in my mind, 2018 to 2023. We're in the first few weeks, if you will, really, of having implemented that plan. And already we're at this ordinance that was something that the plan said should be considered if some other things didn't work. And I don't think we've given a chance for those other things to work.
Mr. McBride.
Well, I'll try not to ramble. I'm sure my colleagues will forgive me somewhat if I do a bit. I know. Thanks for starting the timer. To paraphrase an old axiom, never put off until tomorrow what can be done today. And I'm a little surprised that there isn't more sense of urgency around this issue. I've made a list, pros and cons, but as I recall, when we all sat up here at budget time and when we were having pre-budget discussions, and we talked about the need to eliminate the drop boxes, there was consensus among this group that we were going to have to get to work right away on a multifamily recycling ordinance. And I think that's exactly what staff has done. So I don't think we're in a position to wait. I certainly hear what opponents to this are saying, and I appreciate that, as my colleague Ms. Cummings stated. I understand it's your business and your responsibility is to make money. I don't think anybody faults you for that, and we also take a moment to thank you for being good community partners and good businesses in our community. In many ways, I feel that this is somewhat of a compromise ordinance. Shortly after we had those budget discussions and there were rumblings about multifamily recycling, I know we were approached by a manager for one local student apartment property owner that made the point, hey, we're in the midst of our lease cycle. It takes a year, releasing a year out. Okay, well, that makes sense, and that's why we pushed, that was where August 2019 came from. That's why it's in here at August 2019. If we wait a couple more months or table this tonight, well, now all of a sudden, in fairness to the property owners, we're waiting until August of 2020. So now we've lost that much more time. The simple fact is, in the long run, we will, all of us, save money the more materials that are diverted from all landfills. And I don't think there's much room for argument for that. It is also, as others have mentioned tonight, about equitable accessibility. It's about sustainability. I've been a little surprised over the last 4 or 5 days to hear some of the folks suddenly, in my mind, come out against this. Makes economic sense, makes environmental and sustainable sense. Seems to be kind of a no-brainer. So I'll be very proud to vote aye tonight. Thank you.
Mr. McCarthy, and then Mr. Fritzen.
My notes are too jumbled for me to follow them, so I'm just going to look up and talk. I'm a little something in my throat, so you'll have to bear with me. First, I want to start off and say thank you for everybody who came out to speak to us tonight. I know it can be a daunting task to come and sit here and share something, whether you feel support something we're doing or against something we're doing. And we always seem to garner respectful input, so I just want to say off the top, I appreciate that everybody's been here and been very respectful in their positions, whatever they are. And certainly I want to echo my counterpart, Mr. McBride's sentiments about our business owners here in Normal that operate rental units here and in Bloomington as well. But we appreciate what you do for our community, and certainly we're listening to your concerns about the type of actions we take and trying to move forward on what I hope is a common goal. I'll talk about that in a minute. I've certainly listened to over the course of, with accelerating expediency, the last 3 days seems to be a lot of heated attempts to reach out to us. And I'm sorry for those of you that I couldn't get back to directly or left messages for you. There just simply wasn't enough time in the last 48 hours to get to everybody. But I certainly appreciate the students coming out and their passion about wanting access and having an equal right to be able to do this, but I also appreciate the business owners as well. I do want to underline something Mr. McBride said, and kind of undercuts a couple of my concerns about this conversation and a motion to postpone. We all sat here in January and went through 6 hours of budget, and we were looking for, frankly, a bunch of money to cut out of the budget. And then we came back and we made some decisions, and one of them was a roll-off recycling. And that, in January, we talked about multifamily recycling. When we passed the budget in March, we talked about multifamily recycling. And then when we passed the solid waste plan, we talked about multifamily recycling. So I'm a little concerned now that we're backing off of that when each time along the way. The pilot idea I have a bit of a concern with. At the time, back in February, I heard from one particular, I won't name him right now, property company, and the concern expressed was that they needed leasing cycles. And so I think several of us heard that concern and came back, and so we put that in, and what we thought over a year to try to figure this out. And with a very, very broad implementation ordinance, there's very little that's specific about how you actually have to implement it. There's some benchmarks, obviously, and things that you need to do in terms of receptacles that have been mentioned already. And so we've tried to listen to those things. My chief concern of a pilot is that time has really not helped us. Taking more time, and I had a conversation with a property owner on Saturday about this, and he readily admitted it, that property owners have not voluntarily done this because it looks like cost. And he admitted that we're behind as a community compared to some of our peers. And so what's time going to do for us? And what does a pilot really look like when we actually peel back that high-level suggestion? What that high-level suggestion looks like is going back on our budget decision. We cut staff. We cut money out of the budget. We cut recycling bins out of the budget to balance our budget. So our staff that remains got full plates. And so a pilot program would be asking the town of Normal to take staff time and citizen dollars to pay for a pilot program that nobody's required to participate in. And so far, we haven't seen a strong demonstration that people are willing to voluntarily do this. And so what will that really get us? Will we learn much from that program? Will we achieve our budget expectations? I'm afraid we won't. It seems like, and I'm afraid that as a council for our communities and our taxpayers, that we're going to go back on that budget and absorb a bunch more costs trying to do something that I'm not sure we're going to get any fruit out of. My concern also is with a pilot program that we don't have any clear definitions without something like an ordinance of what we say yes to and when we say yes and how it works. Again, talking to a property owner, my question is, can you please if this passes, can you please between now and 13 months from now, can you pick 1 or 2 properties? Can you do that? Is there, help me understand if that's a problem. And he said, no, Kevin, I can do that. And I'll probably knock on some doors and talk to people about their willingness to pay a couple extra bucks a month for that service. And he said, I'll try it. And we talked about a whole host of difficult things. Dirty streams, I think, was mentioned here. This certainly isn't a perfect ordinance. But I don't understand how putting it off and not requiring everybody to participate is going to get us the answers. Not doing it hasn't given us answers so far. And my experience as a small business owner for 25 years is you have to start taking steps where you're not really going to figure it out. Is this perfect? It's far from perfect. That's why hopefully we have over a year to try to start to figure this out and give a lot of latitude to our property owners to try to figure this out in a way that's most prudent for them. Certainly we're going to be listening. The ordinance says that we're going to be listening. I imagine we're going to be listening before that end date of 2022. I'm certainly going to be listening. I also gave a commitment on the phone on Saturday when I was asked by one of the property owners, Kevin, would you commit to listen? And I said, I'm on the phone with you on a Saturday. I'm listening right now. I'm going to continue to listen to you. And if there's things that we've created that are particularly onerous, we're going to come back to it. If you need an example, we just did this with one of our liquor codes. One of our businesses here has a particular Class O liquor license and was inconvenienced because they couldn't do carry-out or couldn't do catering. So we heard the concern of the business owner, we brought the liquor license back up, and we changed it to make the playing field more fair. We have a history of doing that in Normal. We're not going to drop this and just say, tough, deal with it. That's not what we do in Normal. That's not how any of my counterparts I know approach their customer or constituent service here. So I'm afraid we're going to add costs with a pilot that's not going to give us fruition of the information we need. 19 months, I hope, is enough time for us to do some independent pilots in prudent ways that make sense at all the landlord properties, or the 1 or the 2 that makes sense for your businesses, that we do that. I guess in my conversations with property owners in the last 3 or 4 days, is a bigger concern, or equally as big of a concern, is that we're not all on the same goal. So before I was a council member, was a member of the Community-Wide Sustainability Task Force that ran between 2008 and 2010. And that plan, which had nearly 200 residents of the town of Normal involved in that planning process, called for greater recycling by the residents of the town of Normal. So this isn't just since the solid waste plan. This has been on the minds of publicly, formally in a document that we adopted since 2008, formally adopted in 2011, I believe. My concern is that there's some pressure to push us back to a roll-off program or a jointly operated program that restricts access. That hasn't gotten us to the goals that we've put in front of us, either with the sustainability plan or the municipal solid waste plan. I think that would get in our way. My concern is that we're not working towards the same goal of accessibility and long-term cost and long-term sustainability of our town. The vast majority of our residents, since before I was on a council and every planning process I've been in, have told us that loud and clear, that that's what they want us to do. And for better or worse, we're elected by those people that are participating in those plans. And I think we owe it to all the residents of Normal to do our best to do that, certainly taking into account business owners' budgets and trying to be as flexible and listen as much as we can. But I'm afraid time is just going to cost us more money, more staff time, the things that we worked very hard in our budgeting process to try to come to so we could, frankly, limit the amount of staff that we had to cut and the amount of programs that we had to cut in the town of Normal.
Mr. Fritzen.
A question, I think in the solid waste plan, I noticed a graph that talked about the material going to the landfill, that 25% of that is recyclables. So that's, that's part of what could be gained here by pulling that out of there. The other 75% of the material going to the landfill is obviously a pretty strong percentage of it has to go to the landfill because it's that type of material. But are there other categories of material going into the landfill that could impact, that have similar impacts to, continuing to promote recycling? I think construction materials and things like that were identified as maybe the biggest one, and we aren't talking about that. So tonight anyway.
So yes, the solid waste plan is designed to specifically address the gaps in services and in addressing waste streams that are currently being landfilled that could be recovered. And so there is a chart, and I assume you don't all have the waste plan in front of you, but on page 17, table 5, that does, yes, give a very specific breakdown of major waste streams that are going to landfill, how much of each is being recovered, and the significant portion that is not, that is still recoverable. And so the 6 priorities set forth in the solid waste plan are aimed at addressing those recoverable materials. And so those do include, so yes, basic recyclables, we call them traditional recyclables, the materials that you can, collect in current, single stream curbside systems, which in reality what is being lost right now, what is being landfilled is both probably some portion of single-family households that are not participating, but it's commercial recycling. It is materials that commercial businesses, the composition of their waste stream is very similar in most part to residential recycling. So commercial businesses, but also the multifamily housing. And so that makes up the big portion of traditional recyclables that is currently not being recovered. But yes, we also look at things like organics, so food waste, construction and demolition materials, e-waste. So there is, yes, it is all very lined out, clearly lined out in the plan, and the priorities and strategies are then aligned with those gaps.
Thank you.
Mr. McBride?
I knew with my scribbled notes I was going to forget something, so I did forget something that I think is worth mentioning, but I want to thank the resident that brought that book that is sitting up here. I can't remember which one of you did. It's good to see it again. It's obviously very well traveled. And that does remind me that I have probably heard from student apartment residents and non-student apartment residents about this issue. And it's probably the single biggest issue I've heard in my 3+ years on council. One of my concerns about the timeline as it is, I knew that we were going to be discussing this over the course of the summer. And I appreciate our students who are here in attendance tonight, but I can also guarantee you that this chambers would look a whole lot different if this meeting were in September. And I think that's something we should keep in mind.
Thank you. Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, I've got a question, Mr. Brown, for you. In my earlier comments, I commended you and your staff and your committee who put the plan together for the particular item that calls for the geographic-based, non-exclusive franchise agreement for multifamily recycling, and that would be the approach taken in the first 4 years, basically between now and 2022. Why do you think we departed from that and find ourselves more in what's described in the 2023 and beyond phase, where we are directly at an ordinance?
So I need to explain, the concept of the geographic-based, non-franchise, exclusive, arrangement, that strategy, and that's something that. So I've made a number of presentations about the solid waste plan, kind of preview to the normal town council, and then later, the approval process. But for the Bloomington City Council, for the McLean County board, for other entities as well. And so I frequently brought up that as one example of a strategy that we could use as a voluntary approach to any of these priorities outlined in the plan. And that is, looking at eliminating the barrier for haulers of an inefficient route. And so if we, as a third party or some other third parties, it could be, the town staff, worked to collectively bring together a number of customers. And so in this case, we're looking at rental companies, and we're looking at, route densification. And so outline a geographic area and look at the mixed ownership of the rental units in that. But we pull those rental companies together voluntarily, if they wish, and try and bring them together and bid out services for recycling and trash services and try and get the lowest bid. And theoretically, it is a lower cost for the hauler to provide that service because it is less mileage, it is less staff time, it is just more cost effective. So theoretically, they can put in a lower bid than they would if they're just hitting random units or buildings along that same route as opposed to all of them and then going to unload. And theoretically, those cost savings could be passed along, and we, managing this process, pass those savings along to the rental companies with those buildings within that unit. And so it becomes closer to cost neutral, if not cost neutral. And so that is the theory of that geographic unit and the non-exclusive franchise agreement. One of the barriers to implementing that right now, so the solid waste plan has 6 priorities. 5 of them are tied to specific waste streams that need to be addressed. It could be better addressed. The 6th one is, it says more technical services, more education and outreach. Basically, that says more staff time for the EAC to be able to implement this hands-on approach for these other 5 priorities. So since that 6th priority, since all those priorities were developed, so the solid waste plan took 2.5 years. So those were developed fairly early on in the process, and then it was kind of refining and coming with more detailed approaches. But when those were developed, the town of Normal budget was completely different. The state of Illinois budget was completely different. The state of Illinois had not balanced their budget on the back of the local municipalities and then put the burden back down. And the town of Normal had not suffered the budget cuts and staff cuts. And so it was a heads up that if we want to achieve these priorities, it's going to take some more resources. And we're not at a point where more resources can be expended on those right now.
But I guess I go back to something that one of our commenters said, Mr. Snyder, that, in a place like Ironwood Gardens, and I spoke to the property manager out there, she would like to begin at least by putting not a receptacle at every dumpster, but to cluster it according to what would make sense from a geographic clustering point of view from the however many buildings that are out there, many. She would not be in compliance. I mean, I think that's a great place to start for her. I don't think anybody would argue with that as a starting point, but she would not be in compliance with the way this ordinance is written. Nor would the small-time person who maybe has 2, 4 buildings, would they be in compliance? Because there is one right now who does do recycling, and because his operation is small enough, he does not contract with a hauler, and he basically puts out some sort of receptacle in locations that make sense for his residents, and then he takes it upon himself as the property owner and manager to collect those receptacles, put it into a larger receptacle, and then he ultimately takes it to one of our common drop box areas that are still in existence at Chittix Junior High. He would not be in compliance with this ordinance as it's written. So that's why I guess I continue to come back to, I want to get where all of you want us to get, and that is to recycling. And I want us, when we talk about goals, I want us to provide you with the access that's convenient, that's going to then allow you to be compliant and do what you want to do and what you've been raised to do. However, I feel like we have an ordinance here that perhaps because the property owners did not choose to speak up when they had the opportunity to do so, we've got an ordinance that may have some unintended consequences and may not be as good as it could be. And so that's why I guess I come back to the process perhaps wasn't allowed to go on long enough and was not allowed to bring about the creativity and the allow ideas to germinate. And, you know, let's hear from a couple of these examples that I just shared with you. Let's hear from, I believe it's Sammy, one of the larger campus-based owners, who tried and failed, who tried it at the flats a number of years ago, but had to suspend, I believe, because of the contamination issue. What did we learn? What did he learn? Has any of that been taken into consideration in this ordinance? So I want to get where we all want to get. I understand our budget issues. I understand we've taken away half of the common drop-off boxes. So I think we do have a common goal here, but it's the process. And sometimes the process and how you get someplace is just as important as the goal itself. And so it's for that reason that I continue to come back to, this is probably, in my opinion, not the optimal ordinance that we should entertain at this time. It's lacking the input of some of these real-world experiences and the input from the property owners.
I'm not going to bring up a lot of things that were said before, but I will say that I'm solidly with the 4 affirmatives that I've heard tonight, or 3 other affirmatives that I've heard. And I think, especially some of the comments that Mr. McCarthy made, he agreed this is not a perfect ordinance. For background, I can tell you that for 4 years, I have met with ISU Student Government. I have met with the ISU Off-Campus Student Association. We have had social meetings with them to meet with them. They have come to my office and had meetings, and every time the number 1 priority was recycling, access to recycling. So, and I've shared this information with you, so this is not something new in our community. This has been an issue, and the student population has been very patient in working with us on that. The trouble with writing the perfect ordinance is that it would be the size of an encyclopedia volume, in the sense that you're trying to second guess every issue. And I think Mr. McCarthy brought the point up that there are going to be tweaks on this. We have to learn how to do this. People that are putting materials into recycling have to learn some things, and property owners have to learn some things. And how we work together to get to a common goal, because I know for everybody that sits at this table, whatever the final solution or where we end up has got to work for everybody. It's got to work for everybody. Mr. Snyder, I'm going to ask you again, how many trash receptacles at Ironwood? 14? 14. You know, there may be a day where you have 1 or 2 recycle or trash disposal areas and the rest are recycle, but I think you and I can agree that that will not happen by August 1st of 2019. Right. And so you bring up a very valid point that we have to address. I mean, what works for Ironwood Gardens, for as large as that facility is not the same thing that works for a 4-unit or a 6-unit. And we've got to address those issues. But I think we can do that. And I think it's been pointed out very clearly that this council is very amenable to making adjustments as we go along over the next year, so we can make this work for everyone. Again, you know, I've seen other ordinances where we try to address everything, every specific issue, and it's virtually impossible to do. You can't write that kind of an ordinance. But you can, as property owners, as tenants of multifamily properties in this council, we can work together to make this work for everybody involved, and I think the time to do that is now.
Can I entertain a motion to postpone?
Yes. And we have a second?
All right, I would like
Discussion on the motion?
If I may, I think I need to give some specificity around the amount of postponement.
There are 2 types of motions to postpone. One is to postpone indefinitely, and the other is to postpone to a date certain.
Okay.
Because we meet more than quarterly, we're limited in our postponement to a date certain. It would be until the next meeting, would be the postponement to a date certain.
Okay. Well, let me just offer up where I was thinking to go with this, and then let me know how I should put the dates around it. Not indefinite, but I would like to see, in the spirit of not kicking this down the can down the road, that over the next 30 to 45 days, the property owners be brought back together. And I sort of feel like a parent, like when I had my children and they couldn't decide what to have for dinner, and then I decided what to have for dinner, and then they didn't want to have that for dinner anymore. So, part of me wants to give them tough love and say, you had your chance. Part of me says, and this part of me does say this, bring them back together one more time. They got a window of time here before the students arrive the middle of August. So in a 30 to 45-day period, reconvene the owners, get them to say what they wanted to say at the table in a committee, and, ratchet it up. Say, you know what, by, what's the soonest? Let's not wait till August of 2019. What's the soonest that you could get something? What's the soonest that the property manager at Ironwood Gardens could get a couple scattered throughout her property? What's the soonest that the small-time guy could get a contract with a hauler? Or could we allow him to continue to do what he's doing and the way he's doing it and monitor that in a field test? So perhaps bring a deadline up sooner to sometime yet in 2018 to implement, that everybody has to implement something. And then let it roll through the different seasons and come back in May, or perhaps June of next year, perhaps with this same ordinance, but with the benefit of time of a number of field tests from large and small, from on-campus and off-campus. And very likely, we'll be able to implement this ordinance in 2019, maybe without even a change to an I or a T, maybe with some changes. But that's what I would like to see in terms of my postponement motion.
Further discussion on them. Could you clarify a motion to postpone to a date certain, Ms. Lorenz, or are you?
Well, I was hoping I could say till 1 year from now.
Okay.
As I described.
Further discussion on the postponement?
That would be, you can't do it a year from now just because of the way Robert's rules works, so it would have to be a motion to postpone indefinitely, and then it'd be up to the council to bring it back.
All right, well, if that has to be the way it is, then I guess it is indefinite, but that would be the spirit of my indefinite motion. Not for it to be infinity, but for it to be for a period of time.
Okay. Further discussion on the motion? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Cummings?
No.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
No.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
No.
Mayor Kus?
No. The motion to postpone fails. Further discussion on the main motion? Please call the, please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
No.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved. Please, no applause. We have no new business to discuss tonight, so before motion for adjournment, are there concerns or comments? Motion for adjournment, please.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
missed. Oh, thank you.
Yours too.